Comics, they ain't what they used to be. David Roland explains next on Retro Serial. On today's program, we have reoccurring guest David Roland, who is the owner of Comics Plus. On the previous episode, we talked about the evolution of the comic book store, and on this episode, we talk about the evolution of comics themselves, for the most part, with a couple of digressions of the conversation going here and there. However, there are a couple things that you need to know before we get into this interview. The first thing is that and this might come through differently if you're listening through it on different mediums, you're listening to it on audio only or on visual. But David is really into wearing masks, and I came to the store, and originally I'm sitting there talking to him, and I'm not wearing a mask, and so I pause for a second, then I go put on the mask, and because of some cutting and stuff, I'm going to, in one scene, be wearing a mask, and the next scene not wearing a mask, or I am not going to be wearing a mask, then I am going to be wearing a mask. And so that might be a little bit odd, and I just want to let you know ahead of time that's what's going on. And the audio isn't exactly perfect on it either, even though part of it's cut out. But the visual certainly is, I'm not wearing a mask, and then suddenly I am wearing a mask. So I wanted to give you a heads up on that. He is really into that, and he's very cautious about that. And I was sitting there talking to him, and it just occurred to me, hey, maybe he should be wearing a mask, or maybe I should be wearing a mask. And the camera was in such a way that it was difficult to get both of us in the frame because I wasn't wearing a mask. He was sitting really far away, and he said that he'd move a little closer if I was wearing a mask. So there's that for you. That's why things shift around in it, and I think it might come through with the audio just a little bit, but it certainly comes through visually. And the other thing is you got to know that David is totally deaf. I don't think he'd mind me sharing that. He actually wears a button that says, "I'm deaf, please get my attention." And as devotees of the program will know, I am almost fluent in sign language. I'm near fluent in sign language. But David doesn't know sign language. He didn't grow up deaf. He grew up hearing and lost his hearing a little bit later. And he has a cochlear, and he reads lips a little bit. And so with the mask on, there are some times where I'll ask him a question and then he won't quite follow it, or I'll say, hey, let's talk about this, and he won't quite go there. He'll go other places. And I just kind of want to let you know that that's, in my estimation, I think that's what was going on with the program, especially after I'm wearing a mask and he can't see my lips move and he can't get a perfect idea of what I'm saying. He can hear still pretty good with the cochlears, do pretty good, but there are just occasions where you'll be talking to him, and there are many occasions, like if I'm talking to him at the comic book store afterwards, and I'll step away and pull my mask down and so he can actually see what my lips are saying. But you just have to watch for that, because there was a couple times where I asked a question, he went off to another direction. I think that he didn't hear me, nor did he was able to see that I was saying something. So with that in mind, now before we get to the interview, please, as always, it would mean a great deal for me if you like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'd be super honored. It goes a long way. It's a small step for you, but it's a huge honor for us here on the channel. If you want to share this video on your favorite social media, that would also be great. Also, click the bell notification if you want to know when these videos come out, and follow the link below to the Buy Me a Coffee if you're willing to support this channel financially. Every little bit helps, and we thank you for our supporters. And so with that in mind, let's get to the interview. All right, David. Hey, we're back in with our second interview. I'm really glad you could be back on the program. Thanks for showing up at your own store today.
Yes, exactly. I got to make a buck.
Yeah, you got to make a buck. So we were talking a little bit off screen, and one of the biggest things that you were saying was that comic books today aren't what they used to be. I think that's a common... I think as we get older, we say those things. Things today aren't what they used to be. But you were making a point that there is a difference between the comic books in the 80s, the comic books in the 90s, and then the comic books in 2000s. And now we're here at 2021. What's the story there? How come they're not as good as they used to be?
Yeah, like you were saying, I am partial to older stuff. That's what, the nostalgic feeling, what we all grow up with as kids, what we're used to reading. I tell a lot of customers, I feel like modern comics today are missing the fun factor. Comics in the old days used to be fun.
Yeah.
Comics today are dark. Dark, dark, dark. And something that I also tell a lot of customers are comic books in themselves are living, breathing time capsules.
Yeah.
Writers draw inspiration from the world around them. And so what's happening in the world influences their ideas, which therefore translates into paper. Their ideas, their stories. And I hate that. I hate that, especially now.
Right.
Comics for me as a kid growing up were all about escapism. You had bad things in your life, whether it was, something bad happening at school or something bad happening at home or whatever, but you could pick up a comic book and read it, and it was fun. You always envied Iron Man. You wish you could fly around in a metal suit. You always envied Superman. You wish you had strength like that.
Right.
And, it was a form of escapism. And also, through that escapism, you had fun stories where the hero would save the day.
Right, right.
One of the things I remember fondly, referring back to our first interview, was the story I touched base on where, as a kid, some of my early exposures were at the barber shop. Going to get my haircut with my dad and reading the comics on the racks.
Right.
And, the fun thing about it was, while my dad was getting his hair cut, I could pick up a comic book and read it and get to the end of it, and it said, the end.
Right.
And then sometimes if I was lucky enough, they would, sit there BSing, talking politics, sports, whatever the case may be. I could get in another 2 issues, so I could read 3 comics, and I could be satisfied. I wasn't left hanging like, oh my gosh, what happened to our superhero? What's going to happen next? A lot of those stories back then in that late 70s to mid 80s period were fun stories. You had the end. And I kind of personally think it was better storytelling style. It left me as a reader more fulfilled. It made me want to read more. I wanted to see more adventures. But as time went on, everything changes, obviously. As time went on, so did the comic industry. In the mid-'80s, we saw a shift, and you started seeing more big event stories.
Okay, so I think that's because last time we talked about the evolution of the comic book store, where we talked about, like, the going from the hole in the wall with the small heater to an explosion to kind of the after the explosion and stuff like that. So for at least for this first little part here, let's talk a little bit about the comic books, like how they evolved from the time you first got involved with them to today. So we've already established that right now they're not the same as they used to be. They're different. You say they're darker, or there's less escapism. There's more realism, or is this darker and that's not an escape for you.
They're definitely darker. They're not about a lot of the stories are much darker. Like I was saying, in the 80s, you could see the change in how they were telling the stories, and things became event driven. And that was kind of like the first steps of leading to the dark that we're at, so to speak. And 2 big stories off the top of my head that popped to mind were, for Marvel, you had a big event called Secret War.
Okay.
And for DC, you had Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Okay.
And these were huge comic events that took place over the course of a whole year, to tell the whole story through miniseries. And after those 2 big stories,
because of kind of the cliffhanger rather than it's all wrapped up and
you had to buy the next issue. You had to buy book 3, then book 4, book 5. They were both 12-part miniseries, so you had to collect them a whole year. And they did really well for both companies, and they discovered kind of this new formula. Let's tell big events. Let's tell big events. And at some point, that was good, because it gave you time to flesh out more character, more plot line. But, like I said, it opened the door for where we're at now in the 2000s or 2020s. After the big event stories in the 90s, you saw the change again. It used to be they would have in the 80s, Marvel and DC would have like a mini series. Here's our big event. It's just going to take place in this separate little mini series. It didn't affect the rest of the DC universe or the Marvel universe. So what was happening in regular Spider-Man was fine. What was happening in regular Batman was fine, kind of thing. You didn't have to buy them to follow the story, if that makes sense.
Right.
And then in the 90s, you saw a change. They started introducing more crossovers. So not only did you start having events in separate miniseries, but now you started having more crossover issues.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember Marvel particularly would do, an event miniseries on the side, but during the summer they would do the crossovers like with their annuals. If you remember what annuals were, they were like most of the publishers would put out one comic a month, and then at the end of the year or whatever time they would have a 13th issue, the annual. So it's just the way of them to sneak out an extra story kind of thing. But Marvel and DC both started doing crossovers within the annuals. And so then it would be like a summer event. So then you had to buy this New Mutants annual, this X Factor annual, this X-Men annual, this Uncanny X-Men annual to read the stories, the crossovers. They started forcing their customers to buy different books.
Right.
And, as a businessman, I can see that. They're there to sell more issues. They're there to promote, cross-publicize. They want you to try different books to read. You might find new characters or something you like. And that seemed to be the trend for a while during the 90s. And then you had another shift in the 2000s. In the 2000s, it moved further into that crossover. And so then it moved from like being in the annuals to now being in regular issues. Hey, you want to buy this Batman story? That's great. Buy this Batman, buy this Detective, buy this Robin, buy this Nightwing, buy this Catwoman, buy, whatever else. You had to start buying all the different core titles to find the, part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4 of the storyline. And then that moved on into the 2010s, and that's when I really see, or I would say, I think, to me, the straw that broke the camel's back or changed the industry. Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
No problem at all. So let's get to the 2010s. You said 2010 is when you really saw the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, one of the big storylines that I point specifically to all the time, Marvel put out.
Right.
Civil War.
Okay, yeah.
And it was a fantastic story, yes, but it was a super dark story.
Okay,
with everything that happened. And yes, Marvel did incorporate some of it into their Marvel movies, trying to tie it in with the whole Infinity Gauntlet angle too, and they did a good job. It was fantastic the way they worked the two stories together, per se. But it was such a dark story. And it seemed like after that event for Marvel was like, hey, they kept trying to recapture that lightning in a bottle situation.
Right.
And they kept doing next major dark story after next major dark story after next major dark story. And what was frustrating as, both a reader and a retailer were all these stories, not only were they dark, where the characters were falling out with each other, there was death in them, there were just the teams you knew and loved all broke apart, but there was also a lot of no resolution. The storylines never had the end to them. They were all left open-ended because Marvel wanted you to get into the next big storyline.
Right.
And it just continued to go and go and go, and it's frustrating. It's frustrating both as a fan, a collector, and it's frustrating as a retailer.
Yeah.
I've seen my numbers decline over the past 10 years. You would think, people ask me all the time, oh, wow, I guess you're making a lot of money with all these Marvel movies. No.
Really? That surprises me, because I would think that you would kind of make more money. But I think last time you talked about the comic book industry in general kind of took a little bit of a dive. It had its heyday in kind of maybe the late 90s and early 2000s, and took kind of a dive. Were you saying even not a dive. I mean, you're still open and stuff like that, but you know what I mean. Like a little bit. It was cool. It was cool to do the geek thing, and then suddenly it became not as cool or whatever. Interests change. Are you saying even a decline from there?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Like I said, I kind of blame that 2010 error point, in that aspect. And with those big Universal, that's what pretty much those storylines were, Universal.
Right.
They affected every Marvel title.
Uh-huh.
So not only did you have Civil War, which was only a 7-part miniseries, but I can't remember, I think there were 60 crossovers to it. So you had tons of other issues you had to buy to follow the whole storyline. And as a fan, I can see the collectors got disheartened by it. They loved the story on one aspect, but on the other hand, they were like, how am I going to afford 60 parts? Not to mention the 7 miniseries, How can I afford to keep up this hobby? It became so daunting as far as the budgetary constraints and them trying to, what happened is a lot of collectors shortly after Civil War, I started losing subscribers. Fans started turning out. They were like, I'm quitting Marvel. I'm quitting DC. They started quitting cold turkey. And so
I get that when there's never a resolve. That happens in television shows all the time, where it's just like this person comes up and that's those famous in soap operas. But not that I was a soap opera fan ever or anything, but just there's something that happens and you're like, oh, they'll solve it in the next one, then they don't solve it in the next one, then they don't solve it in the next one, and finally you're just like, gosh, just forget this. What am I watching this thing for?
Exactly. That's a great analogy for it, and that's what happened. I've lost so many subscribers over the years, both fans of Marvel and DC, not even to mention the whole reboots.
Yeah.
Where they're stopping the companies and stopping the titles and starting over at number one. That gets very frustrating too. And that's frustrating for old school fans like myself, because you have this, I've always collected Thor from days gone by, but I don't know how many Thor number ones I have now where they've restarted Thor again. It stopped and started, stopped and started.
Is it kind of like the Dark Knight and then Batman regular, then Batman Dark Knight, and then Batman?
Well, those are like different titles they were producing, but Batman itself, you had Batman ran for the longest time, okay, and then they ended the DC universe, I think it was about 8 or 9 years ago, and then they launched the 52. So see, that was an end of an era right there for Batman, and a lot of fans were disappointed. I think Batman ended around 850 issues or something. So as a long-term collector, you're like, wow, you can boast proudly, I've got Batman 300 up. That's great. That's a long collection, 300, 850 consecutively. And then DC said, we're stopping. It's over with. It's done. And then they started with a new Batman number one. And you're supposed to put that new number one next to 850. So your collection goes 300 through 850 and then 1 again.
Right.
And then so they did the 52 universe for almost 5 years. And then guess what? They ended it again. Boom. So the 52 universe is over with. They stopped Batman, and guess what? They started with Rebirth, and now you got another Batman number one.
Yeah.
So now you have another Batman number one,
Yeah.
and so DC realizes, hey, we're fast approaching 1,000 issues of Batman, and so what do to confuse fans even more? Let's go back to the old numbering system. So you're on the 3rd series of Batman, and it's going along. Here's 24, 25, 26. Now it's 937, 938, 939.
Yeah.
They changed the number right in the mid of the series.
Yeah.
And so they're going back because they realize, we can cash in on this Batman 1000 landmark, and they did a good job with the story. I'm not knocking the Batman 1000. It was good. It was very popular, brought in a lot of fans. But, I hear it time and time again from collectors. They're like sick of the reboots. Just, I've always said to kind of use the 90s movie, if you build it, they will come. Kevin Costner,
Right.
And so I've always used that. If you write it, they will come. So I feel like if DC and Marvel really want to sell stuff, if they just write a good story, if they have good artists, a good writer team combo on board the book, the fans will come.
Do you think that's how you have to solve that problem that's happening right now? Is that still happening?
Oh no, it's still happening. Yeah, they're still writing dark stories and they're still rebooting stuff. How many more years before DC decides to reboot Batman again? I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
I only know I'm more acquainted with the movies. I had a passing acquaintance with the comic books because I was a big fan of the movies of the superhero genre movies, and that's something I know that I wanted to move in with you as well, how it affected that. But I do see it in the movies too. And maybe it comes from the comic books. I mean, I remember, the first big Batman cool 1989 or was it 1990 movie that came out, and that was cool. Second one I thought was good. Didn't get as much a critical acclaim, but then you had Batman Begins, which I thought was great. But it was like, okay, another origin story, and then now we're getting another Batman. Where I don't know if it's an origin story or not, but you also saw that with Spider-Man. Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire came out, origin story, and then the Amazing Spider-Man, origin story, and now we've got another reboot. Is that the same kind of thing that's happening in comic books, or?
But the comics been happening for years longer than what you're seeing in the movie.
Right. Let's move into this. Let's move into the way the comic books have affected the television movies, because I remember the television movies and the TV shows. That's also something. Unless you wanted to finish up, is there something more you wanted to say about comic books?
No, pretty much touch base on it. Yeah. I'm an old curmudgeon, but I'm not. I don't want to sound like what they call a negative Nelly on the industry. There's some great stuff out there too. That's why over the past 20 years as a fan and a retailer, I push my customers hard to try indies. I love independents, and that's the nice thing about indies is you get all kind of genre. So if you are a superhero fan from DC and Marvel, you can find superhero indies. But then you can also find sci-fi, you can find horror, you can find western, crime noir, comedy, whatever you're looking for. That's the beauty of indies. You can get any kind of title that fits your desire or need to read. And also one of the big things with indies is almost 100% of them end. They have a resolution to it. They get to the end.
That's good.
Versus the Marvel and the DC big mega event storylines that keep going and going and going. At least with the indies, you can have conclusion. And you can say, wow, that was good. I'm sorry to see it end. Yes, you're sorry that its storyline's over with. But at the same time, you're also happy you've got, to the end, it's done. And you can feel, comfortable with the way the characters ended. And then also, too, in the back of your mind, you can know they didn't beat this horse to death. They didn't ruin your favorite characters and do something bad, like you were saying, in the soap operas. You find a character that you like on the show, and they keep writing these bad stories, and then they make you hate the character again.
Right. They just drop out. There's really no resolve sometimes in a lot of these shows. It's just it's difficult. It's difficult. I remember that on The Big Bang Theory. There's a couple episodes of The Big Bang Theory where they introduce a character, and then they were gone. Especially his girlfriend, who was the redheaded girl. I can't remember exactly the episode, but she was a nurse or something, or a doctor, or something, a medical doctor, or a medical nurse. I can't remember, but she just is gone. They didn't break up or nothing. It's just she's just written out. I'm sure there's a story behind the scenes, but it's just like, okay,
probably,
I kind of want to see this.
Who knows? The actress wanted out because she had a movie role or another TV show, or could have been there's drama behind the drama. Actors don't get along behind the scene, and so time to fire them, write them out. Whoop, they're gone. You hear stuff like that down the road, but I can say that I've never watched a Big Bang episode.
Oh, really? You're in the comic book store.
People talk to me about it all the time.
Well, I have to say that only after about 4 or 5 seasons, I stopped watching because it's just the same kind of. The first 3 seasons were, in my opinion, really good. 4 and 5 were okay, but after that, it's just like, okay, I know, Sheldon's going to be the guy, he's going to have one kind of line, and this person's going to have another. It becomes super formulaic.
I can understand the appeal of it. I have seen clips from the show.
Yes.
I did love how they integrated real life sci-fi people into the show.
Yeah, Will Wheaton.
I think there was a clip where George Takei from the original Star Trek was on it. I've seen that. That was pretty funny. And then I liked there was a clip that had James Earl Jones and Carrie Fisher from Star Wars.
Yeah.
And James Earl Jones was pranking her and ringing her doorbell, but they were playing their real selves.
Yeah.
And I could see the appeal to that. But as a nerd, they kind of over exaggerated some of the nerdiness, I think. And that turned me off to a little bit of it. It's the same thing.
I was a nerd growing up too as well. A different kind. I like I said, I wasn't super into the comic books, partly because I had a reading disability. So it was always difficult. I'd get comic books and I'd think I'd read them, and I would never read them. But the movies and stuff like that quote unquote nerds or geeks were into, I was 100% on board with. And the action figures and all that stuff. I collected all that stuff. But let's move a little bit into how comic books were the inspiration for a lot of TV shows, and how comic books were then, and those TV shows then became movies, or movies even at the time.
Yeah. Going back going back to the 70s and 80s. When nerdiness was in the closet, so to speak.
Right.
There were a lot of nerds around, but, we kept it to ourselves because that was a different generation. We were heavily bullied. And so
I received a lot of bullying. I think that there should be an episode on being bullied as a nerd in the 80s or something like that. But I was heavily bullied as a kid. And the last time you talked about that I don't know, did you keep it low key enough that you weren't bullied, or?
Correct, right. I was a closet nerd. I didn't wear my Marvel shirts out in public.
I see.
I didn't flash any gang signs or anything like that. I kept everything low key.
Yeah.
Because I saw what was happening to fellow nerds. Now some people would say, "Well, you were being a coward. You weren't being true to yourself. You weren't being whatever." But at the same time, I look at it like I was being smart. I didn't want to be beat up. I didn't want to be, pantsed. I didn't want the atomic wedgie.
Right.
I didn't want to experience any of that stuff. I just wanted to be left alone. I wanted to exist in my own little universe. And so
you weren't necessarily being. It's not like you were out on the football team and then secretly reading comic books. You just weren't public about it.
Right.
That's
exactly. I just didn't flash my nerdiness out in public.
I was the opposite. I totally was. I was the. Well, look, open up a little bit about myself just so you can know me and my audience knows me a little bit. I was raised by a single mother, and I was the only child, and I was, she continually told me how brilliant I was, and I had no brothers and sisters as filters to kind of say, don't do that, that's stupid. You don't do that.
I was the opposite. I had 3 brothers, so I experienced stupidity all the time.
So they would tell you, hey, don't wear that. Don't. I just know my mom would be like, oh, that looks so good on you. You should wear that. It's whatever. I would get into stuff and have an idea, and there'd be no filter and just encouragement because my mom thought I was a super genius, which of course I am. So thanks, Mom, for that. But I didn't have anybody to tell. So I remember one time I saw Michael Jackson wearing a magic glove, and I wanted to wear a magic glove. And so I got a magic glove, got a white glove on, and had the sequins sewed in and all that stuff, and wore it around town, not knowing that I was going to be the laughing stock of the town. If I had an older brother or something like that, to say, hey, don't do that.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of thing that happened to me all the time. Me and my friend, we would take dowels, and we were into Conan, and so we'd make swords, and I'm walking around with a sword, with a wooden sword. Not knowing. So I wish I would have been more like you, actually, Dave.
You were target number 1, definitely. That's what I saw too, and I hate to say it. I hate to say it happened back then. We look back at it, we can laugh at it. But, as a kid, 10, 11, 12, it's devastating,
It
can affect you, the trauma, the self-esteem is crushed. There's a lot of things that can happen emotionally to you because of it. But it's definitely a different world.
Yeah.
But
Well, let's talk about the movies, because I do want to get into that a little bit. It's something that I've always kind of wanted to talk about, how the comic book industry affected the movie industry.
Yeah,
you can hear me.
Going back to what I was saying, yeah, all the nerds, whether we were, hidden in the closet or out in public, we grew up in that 70s and 80s period, so, that influenced us. That influenced our lives, how we dressed, how we acted, it influenced us. We had our hero worship, we loved the movies that we grew up on, like I said, Conan, or, the original Captain America movie back in the 80s, or the original Amazing Spider-Man TV movies back in like the 70s, I think, on those.
Yeah.
That terrible Swamp Thing movie back in the 80s, we saw those things that affected us. So as kids, we get older, we become adults. We go to high school, we go off to college, we find our calling, our profession, we move into that. And a bunch of those nerds moved into, guess what? Writing. And so that writing spilled over. Some of them became, professional novelists, or they moved out to Hollywood and started writing scripts, or whatever the case may be. So they started working on TV shows or started working on movies. And so definitely that's where a lot of, I think the modern TV, if you go back and look at those writers, if you Google their names, episode written by so-and-so, you start looking up the writer, you're going to find out that writer was, that writer's, 45 to 55 years old. And so they're in that prime window of that generation at X, where we grew up, watching Back to the Future, where we went to the movies, we watched Dark Crystals on the big screen, we saw, Superman Quest for Peace, unfortunately, on the big screen,
Is that the third?
Superman 1 and 2 we saw on the big screen, and loved those.
Yeah, 1 and 2 were great. 1 and 2 were great.
But,
3 and 4 not so good.
We have our fun things that we remember fondly, the Superman 1s and 2s, and we have the bad movies that we don't want to remember as much. But it influenced us, and it made us who we are today. And like I said, those people have gone on to have successful careers.
Yeah. Well, what do you really think is the advent of the modern? I mean, would you say there's a stark difference between, say, the Superman of 1970, was it 78? 70,
yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, 77, 78. Yeah,
78. To you get to Batman. In 89 or 90, I can't remember which one it was, 89 or 90.
Yeah, I think 89, that sounds right.
Yeah, that's a long time. The superhero movie industry was really, I can't even really think of too many movies. It all seemed to be television shows. What do you think the stark difference is between that and this? I mean, is it just technology? Is it just that the technology got better? Was it story writing or what?
A little bit of everything. It was just the perfect storm event, they say. And technology's gotten better. Computer CGI aspect has gotten cheaper.
Yeah.
So now the directors can do the big fight scenes, the explosion scenes, the special effects they want for cheaper amounts now. Also, too, the nerdiness has now moved more mainstream, so they've tapped into a new demographic, new market. They realize all these secret nerds out there can support their industry on its own.
Right.
Just there's a number of things. The writing, like you said, has gotten better.
Are they appealing to a new audience too? I mean, these last, especially since the Marvel movies kind of hit, they seem to be appealing to a new generation. They want to appeal to us, but they also kind of want to appeal to our children or our grandchildren at this point. It seems like they're writing for them as well.
Yeah, there's definitely more kids going to the movies. I just wish more of those kids would come in and read the comics.
Right.
Sadly, we don't see that as much. I see it a little bit, don't get me wrong. There's just a tiny, tiny fraction, but kids nowadays, modern kids, have a whole different world they're growing up. I don't know about yourself, but when I was a kid, the town I lived in, when I was like 8, 9 years old, we only had 2 TV stations. 3 if you count PBS.
Yeah.
And that was it. We didn't have cable TV.
Right.
We had the antenna. So, if there was a bad rainstorm, somebody would go outside and twist the pole to, because the wind blew the antenna off a little bit. We would twist the pole to bring in the signal better. And then I think it was by the time I was a teenager, we finally got a third TV station. So now we finally had CBS, ABC, and NBC. Still didn't have cable TV.
Yeah.
There was the rich kids in the neighborhood, the rich families that had cable, or my neighborhood didn't even have cable. It was such an older neighborhood, there was no cable line. So really, in my neighborhood, we only, I think it was something like 20 or so homes on my street. But out of the 20 homes, only one had a satellite dish. And that
satellite, yep. I
big
remember the
honking
huge
dish, like
satellites,
20
yes.
feet diameter, in the backyard or what have you. Took up like half the roof, their line, so to speak. But hey, we would go hang out at their house because wow, they had like 80 channels. It was amazing, to finally see something different.
Right.
And but anyway, point being, as a kid, we didn't have that extra entertainment. We didn't have internet. We didn't have the cable. We didn't have the satellite. We didn't have the game systems. The game system I grew up on was twist a little knob, and you hear the sound boop, boop, boop. We played Pong. That was it. There again, that one rich kid with a huge satellite dish, they were the first person in our neighborhood to have Atari.
Yeah.
And it was like amazing. It blew our mind. We finally saw video games for the first time. The first Atari came out. But point is we didn't have that extra entertainment. So we had to entertain ourselves as kids growing up.
Yeah.
And so entertaining ourselves meant, doing outside activities. For me, in Georgia in the summer, that was a no-go.
No.
Too much humidity, too much heat, too many mosquitoes, too many gnats. Being outside was just terrible.
Yeah.
So you stayed inside. Well, what could I do when I was inside? Read.
Yeah.
So whether it was comic books or books, I read a lot of books too growing up.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. I absorbed, in myself in the books, and that was my entertainment. But modern kids now, I think one of the reasons they don't read is because they do have that whole world of entertainment.
Got everything. You have everything.
They can just pull out their little phone, and that's it. And it's like, boom, you got instant download or instant playing or Spotify or whatever. You can listen to your favorite songs, your favorite band. You want to watch your favorite show, boom, log right into Netflix or Hulu or whatever the case may be. Hey, you want to read a book? That's great. Go to Amazon, do a digital download. Boom, there it is. I can start reading my books or what have you. Their entertainment is the little portable computer device. And so,
which I wish I would have had, but I mean, I'm glad. In some ways, I'm glad I didn't. But one of the things that we did have was those two channels. And on those two channels, or three, well, I had three, and then and then we had a couple locals. So I mean, that was one of those things. But on those channels were things like Wonder Woman.
Oh wow! So I wasn't even, Wonder Woman was on mainstream TV. Yeah.
So Wonder Woman, and then sometimes that old Spider-Man movie would come out.
Yeah.
That was horrible. That was a horrible show. Wonder Woman actually, I think, kind of holds up a little bit better. Honestly, I don't know if you've gone back and watched any of the Wonder Womans from the what is it, the 70s? Is that what it's from? The 70s. But I think Wonder Woman holds up a little bit better. That Spider-Man show, that live-action Spider-Man show,
it was bad.
It was a horrible show. Did you watch it?
It was horrible, but you know what? We still loved it.
We loved it because it was all you had.
Because exactly right, it's all we had.
And it was something live action. There was the cartoon industry for sure that you could draw it, but then to actually see a person scaling up a wall or something like that, it was limited. It was limited to that, and to see it now is just it's crazy how much it's grown and how good it's gotten. But what are some of the ones that you watched at the time? Tell me about some of the television shows, either live action or whatever, that you were into.
I was definitely that child of the 70s and 80s, and there was some good stuff that I experienced. Going back a while ago, I said at PBS. Thank goodness for that. That exposed me to a lot of British TV. And of course, one of the British shows I got to watch was Doctor Who.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm a Doctor Who fan going all the way back to Tom Baker days.
Oh, okay.
So, there's all these modern Whovians that have jumped on board in the past 10 years.
Right.
Well, it's like, hey, I got you guys beat. I've been in it since, the early 80s, So I got to witness a lot of, talk about some bad TV, too,
Right.
Seeing some of those bad shows now, but... when I was 10, 11, 12, it was good. It was good sci-fi. It was good entertainment. And so I loved a lot of the British shows that I grew up on at the time. Other things I grew up on with American TV was Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I can barely remember a little bit of the original Battlestar Galactica. I was a little bit younger for it. And then, of course, Battlestar Galactica 80 came out. We won't talk about that one.
I don't even know if I saw that one.
Don't waste your time. That was bad. That was like that category of the Spider-Man. It was pretty bad.
Yeah.
The premise is they finally found Earth, and when they come to Earth, it's just it's terrible. I like the previous Battlestar where they were more in space, so you got to see more of the aliens and unique storylines, unique characters. Especially love the sci-fi angle, and that I think Battlestar Galactica is probably what began my love of sci-fi.
Did they have a comic book, Battlestar Galactica?
Yeah, Marvel did. Marvel did a comic book. I want to say around 79, maybe into 80.
Okay.
And they ran it for a while. Then it stopped after the show was over with, and with many years no Battlestar Galactica. The license was free game, and then several years ago, I don't remember exactly who. I think it was Dynamite Entertainment picked up the license and did some more modern Battlestar Galactica stories.
Oh, okay.
Because you had the new Battlestar Galactica that had come out.
Yeah.
And that created a whole new generation of fans, so that was fantastic stuff. Another great classic one, I'm excited they announced a reboot for it, Buck Rogers.
I'll be interested.
I grew up on the Wilma Deering, Gil Gerard era.
Yep.
I love the cheesiness of it, but Legendary Pictures is supposedly working on a movie. There's going to be a live action, 2-hour movie, and Legendary Pictures hopefully will do a fantastic job. But I can predict this is going to be a much darker Buck Rogers than we grew up with.
They always that seems to be a tendency to kind of make it a darker thing that like it was. So like the Batman, the original Batman, you look at not the comic books, but the television show. It's very bright colors, and then everything's kind of dark, darker colors. So even Robin is a darker red and a darker orange or yellow. You know what I mean? A darker. They tend to kind of do that because I think X-Men too. I mean, just you look at X-Men. It's just like Wolverine in the comics is not Wolverine that you see in X-Men.
In the movie, yeah.
No.
Well, some of that, the X-Men, I remember when they first made the announcement, years ago, the first X-Men movie was coming, my customers then were all very critical of the movie, and they were bashing it before it even came out. And they're like, how can they do this? They're not wearing their costumes. It's like, I want to see Wolverine in his costume. So people were seeing the early pictures and they're all clad in the black leather outfits or whatever. I want to see Jean Grey and her yellow green, I want to see Cyclops in his blue and gold, and I understood where the fans were coming from.
Right.
And I had to tell the customer, I said, well, let's reserve judgment until the movie comes out. Let's see how the movie is. And I tried to tell them, I said, one of the things they were looking for, before the movie even came out, I said they needed to show this was a team, and so they were a unit. And so being a team and a unit, it has kind of a military feel, So can you imagine, it would have been quite comical to see, Wolverine hopping around the screen in his brown, and Jean Grey in her yellow and green, and Scott in his blue and gold doing their battle thing.
Right.
I told people it would have been like watching a Shriner's clown parade on TV, on a big screen. I said, you would have been laughing at it more. I said, but being that they looked cohesive, as a unit and a team, that pulled them together.
Yeah.
And of course, when the movie finally came out, that proved to be true, what I was saying. And people were like, wow, that was really good. So the fans at first were very critical because they were changing too much from what they were used to, but then they understood it later why Hollywood had to do that.
Well, I think too that feeds into that is that those things just look a little cheesy. Bless you. They just look a little cheesy. You know what I mean? It looks better dark for the average person.
Like you said, they're reaching the average fan too.
As a comic book fan, that's okay. I mean, it's good. But as just a general type of moviegoer, to see Wolverine, with the big and yellow, and you know what I mean, I think that people would have gone, this is just this is for children.
Right.
You know, so you wanted to appeal to adults. Were there any other? Well, but then that swung back because because they had that dark period. But then when and it didn't swing back for very long. But when the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man came out, it was very colorful.
Yeah.
It was super. It seemed to kind of swing back the opposite direction for a little while. Now it's all dark again. But what were some other changes? Were you a big fan of the comic books of the X-Men from the
No, I never really got into X-Men.
Okay.
I was always more of an off the beaten path collector.
Okay.
I was always looking for my own thing to be.
You said Spawn.
Yeah.
Last time.
Spawn. I didn't read Spawn.
Oh, you didn't
either.
read Spawn. Okay.
Yeah. No, I was always kind of the opposite. Whatever the fans were into, I was not. Because I felt like I wanted
a conscious choice.
I didn't want to be one of the sheep following the crowds per se.
Yeah.
Not that I'm saying that's bad or something, but I just wanted to do my own thing.
Yeah.
So growing up in the '80s, going to the local comic shop. My comic shop that I went to, all my friends were definitely X-Men fans.
Uh-huh.
All my nerd friends I knew there, they were huge fans of John Byrne and Chris Claremont. These guys were the epitome of X-Men, history and heyday, and they gave us some of the best stories that have now been turned into movies. And that was fantastic. But that's all I heard over and over again. My friends were like, John Byrne, John Byrne, John Byrne, and Chris Claremont, and I'm like, oh my God. And so the more they kept talking about X-Men and John Byrne and Chris Claremont, the less I wanted to read it.
Yeah.
It's like I want to find something unique. I want to find something different that these guys weren't on board with. And that's kind of why personally started pushing into indies a little bit, started exploring, trying to widen my taste and see what was out there. But don't get me wrong, I did read Marvel, I did read DC. I jumped on board the Batman bandwagon for a while, but I read older Batman during the 80s, and then after the movie came out with Michael Keaton, everybody was instantly a Batman fan.
Yeah.
So everybody was on board the Batman bandwagon.
Right.
Guess what? I jumped off.
You jumped off.
Because I knew they were going to beat the Batman horse to death, and they did.
Yeah.
DC started launching so many different Batman titles, you couldn't keep up with it. And I was like, I'm glad I left, So I kind of cut
you
cold
didn't even
turkey.
buy the comic
And then also I was
or?
glad I left because I felt like all those titles were watered down. They weren't true to the spirit, and so I felt like Batman was going to go down the toilet. So I got off of it before it did,
I understand.
Other things like that happened too. I
What
still
about,
followed Thor. But I didn't follow a lot of the big team books. I had my favorites. If your fans can look around, if you see the color of my store is red and blue, and I don't know if you can see the Spider-Man statue way in the back.
Yeah.
So that's where I drew inspiration.
There's another Spider-Man there too.
Yeah,
and stuff
my
like that.
logo is the red and blue, the red around the store, the blue trim, everything. I've always loved Peter Parker.
Yep.
I've always thought he was a great hero. He's kind of the unsung hero. Have I followed Peter Parker and Spider-Man religiously over the past 35 years? No. I read it off and on, but I still love the character. I love what he stands for.
Uh-huh.
The adversity he has to face. That's kind of why I'm always a little bit more drawn to Marvel characters, I think, than DC. With Marvel, it felt like you as a fan, a reader, could personally relate to their problems.
Yeah.
I mean, if you take Peter Parker specifically, he's been fired. Who here hasn't been fired from a job? He's been evicted. Okay, hopefully no one's ever, experienced a forced eviction, and it's bad when they have to. He's been dumped by his girlfriends. He's been divorced. I've gone through divorce.
He's been divorced?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I'm a divorce. I'm married again, but I went through that.
No, not you. I meant Spider.
Spider-Man went divorced. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I'm talking about Spider-Man, not you.
Him and Mary Jane broke up years ago. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I mean, so see, Marvel kind of writes a humanistic side, I feel like, to their characters, and in Spider-Man you feel sorry for on an extra level because he's the unsung hero. He's got this great power. He protects New York. He protects the people, but he can't pay his own rent with his power.
Yeah.
He can't pay the bills. If he had, some kind of billionaire to sponsor him, kind of thing, so that he can do crime fighting full time. That's what he does best. That would be a different story. And Marvel's kind of gone that way over the years with the Iron Man persona. And I think that's why they touch base with it with the newer reboot with the Tom Holland.
But that's true though, because the Tom Holland is not going to experience the same thing that we saw the previous Emanations experience.
Yes, I know. That's what I hate. That's what made Spider-Man who he was.
Right.
And that's one of those characters you could relate to, because early Peter Parker, guess what? He was bullied in school.
Yeah.
And so he had to deal with, I think, Flash, the football jock nemesis, that was always giving him a hard time. So that made you as a fan or reader that you could connect more personally to his character. Because as a nerd, we were bullied, so you could feel his pain as well. Tom Holland, they're going, I think, in a different direction to help him experience the pains per se, but I think they're missing out on the whole bully aspect, the origin story. But yeah, I definitely loved the first two Maguire movies. They were fantastic. People ask me which is my favorite. I can't pick one.
Yeah.
They are both good in their own rights. Just fantastic stories.
You didn't like the third one, though.
3, yeah. 3 we can kind of forget about.
I liked the third one. I didn't love it the way I loved the first two, for sure.
3 had some good angles.
But I did like it.
I love Sam Raimi. I'm a big fan of Sam Raimi, going all the way back to his early days when he was doing Hercules. I think it was on TV. I've been following his career a long time with the Army of Darkness, Evil Dead franchise. So when he did the third movie, the movies in general, I was on board on. But he got so much pressure from Sony. He wanted to just do the Sandman story. And Sony's like, no, push Venom. So it was one of those, there were too many plot lines going on, too many characters. I got bored years ago, and I took a copy of Spider-Man 3, and I re-ripped it on my computer and edited out all the Venom stuff. And reburned it, so I just had the Sandman story.
Should upload
it
to
was
YouTube.
Fantastic. If you watch it that way, it was fantastic. Of course, it got choppy at the end when Sandman and Venom were fighting. I had to start editing out scenes totally. But up until that point, it was a really good story, and you became sympathetic for Sandman.
Yeah.
He was just a hard, down on his luck guy, a father trying to take care of his daughter, and he had to resort to a life of crime to pay the medical bills. And so he was a character you really felt sorry for. But that made the movie much, much better. I'd hope one day that maybe that Sam Raimi could go back and do a re-edit and release it the way he wanted to.
Right.
And kind of do what I did.
Well, let me bring up a couple of things, get your opinion on them. Do you remember the 80s cartoon with
Spider-Man and his amazing friends?
It was Spider-Man, Iceman, and Firestar.
Yep.
Was that the one?
Yep, that's it. Spider-Man and his amazing friends.
I loved that show.
It was a fantastic show. Exactly. It was a lot of fun, and that was the epitome of the 80s comic history then too. That's what I liked about those comics from the 70s and 80s. Is they were very reflective. You could watch that 30-minute episode of Spider-Man, and then the crime, the villain comes in, commits the crime, the friends band together, stop the villain, save the day, it's done.
Yeah, right.
So you had your escapism, you had your heroism that was in it, and you had a conclusion to it, and so
you had
you
had a hot redhead.
You walked away happy as a fan.
Yes.
So that's why I feel like some of the new stuff that's so dark, and then not only is it dark, but it keeps being drawn out, and it's like fans are getting turned off from it. Yeah.
Did you care for the Amazing Spider-Man movie, the one with not Tom Holland? What's the
Richard Garfield?
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
you didn't like him.
I watched him. But not a slight against Garfield. He's a good actor.
Yeah, he's
and
a great
I've seen
actor.
him in so many other movies. But to me, he fell very flat as the Peter Parker persona. He came across
that's true. His Peter Parker persona was a little too cool.
Yes, exactly. He didn't experience the bullying, that Tobey Maguire did.
Yes.
He didn't experience the rejection. Here's Richard Garfield with my strong chin and chiseled good looks and perfect coif hair. And he's like, woe is me, I'm so ugly, the girls won't talk to me. And I'm like, you know.
Right.
So that's what I wanted to call. You know, it's like, no. It didn't make him believable.
Right.
It didn't make him believable. He didn't suffer
That was
the
the
same
only
pains.
down part of that show, I have to say. But I did enjoy it for myself. I did like
They were good
it.
action movies.
Yeah,
you know,
they were good action movies.
I just could not connect to his character.
Yeah.
You know, I just could not connect to it.
Because Peter Parker
Tom Holland is doing a much better job, though.
Tom Holland's doing a good job kind of bringing out the fact that he actually looks like he's in high school.
Yes.
Not a 28-year-old pretending to be in high school.
I like some of that, though. I know he's an older actor, but I like that naivete that he's bringing across the screen because he's a new hero.
Yeah.
So he's bound to make the mistakes.
I think he looks the part better than anybody that they've had so far.
Yeah, and then he's also got this this wonder, his eyes of wonder, you know, and that's why he has so much hero worship for Tony Stark, Iron Man, because he's enamored. You know, he's like, when I grow up, I want to be like you. You know, and in some ways he already is, but he's too young to see it.
But you notice how Aunt May keeps getting hotter as it goes. Have you noticed that? Like the first Spider-Man, that old, you know, and then now.
Yeah, that's one of the pet peeves I have. I mean,
the new.
I like Marissa Tomei, you know, but they made a big deal. They made Aunt May like 40 years old rather than being the grandmother figure she's always been.
I think in the next emanation of Spider-Man, she's going to be like 25.
Yeah.
It's going to be like my step aunt. He's going to have to explain it. It's gonna.
Because see, that's.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
But I
just noticed that, you know. I mean, Sally Fields, you know, in the Garfield ones, you know, is a step younger and a step in the regular, and now Marissa Tomei is just like, holy smokes, she's hot, you know. It's just like you don't think of Aunt May as being hot.
See, I feel like they've lost some of the history to the mythos because that was where Peter could always turn to advice.
Yes.
When he was struggling, you know, both as a person, as Peter Parker, and as the hero, Spider-Man, he could always ask his Aunt May for advice. And being that she was more like a great aunt, elderly, or grandmother, she's had a longer life. So she's made mistakes. She could always offer great words of wisdom. And so that helped steer Peter, you know, on his history, his course that he needed to go to become the hero he is. How much can the 45-year-old woman offer as an aunt? You know, so she might have had a few bad breakups here and there, kind of thing. She might can offer a little bit of expertise on relationships, but what can she really offer on life per se? You know, And so I feel like they've messed that up a little bit.
Yeah,
you know?
I think so too. Well, I think they're just trying to appeal to a
younger audience,
or whatever, or make it a little bit more hip in its own way. One of the things that I hate about the new Star Wars movies is that, I mean, I love The Mandalorian, and I've talked about this before. I like a couple of the satellite ones. Rogue One was good.
Yes.
But
I like Solo. A lot of people are down on Solo, and I thought Solo was fantastic.
I've talked about this before on the channel. I loved Solo. But one of the things that really bugs me that is coming up in all these movies is that appeal to a new, instead of just wanting to satisfy the fans that grew up in the 80s watching it, they're trying to get new fans.
Yeah.
Which I understand, but I think that's where it's really upsetting the old fans. Because we want to see our heroes. We don't want to see a bunch of new little creatures that little kids are gonna enjoy. You know, we want to see our heroes.
New BB-8 became our R2-D2.
Yeah, kind of a thing. Kind of a little bit of a cheesy factor to appeal to the children to get new fans in. And I think that is happening a little bit with some of the even when you think about Aunt May now being this younger girl. Well, not younger, but you know what I mean. Not an elderly girl, because I think little kids are not going to be able to. You know, I'm not going to talk to great grandma. I might talk to grandma, but I might not talk to great grandma. You know, it's one of those things that really bothers me about the new emanations. Although not, you know, I mean, really, how many perfect movies are there? You know what I mean? There's not too many. You know, you can find a flaw in almost any movie no matter how good it is. But that does seem to be one that kind of grinds on me, and I think grinds on a lot of people who are into comic, at least I'm sure into comic books, but are into the comic industry, movies, television shows, that kind of thing for sure. So, well, cool, David. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think your store's about ready to open, isn't it? Oh, we're about 15 minutes past your store.
That's okay. I'm watching the door. No one's walked up yet.
Nobody's walked up yet.
So we're okay.
You're ready to close down and go home, right? You don't have that luxury.
Just beginning. Oh, there we go.
Our first one. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and any parting words that you want to say as far as comic books or the industry. Let's bring it back to the beginning. This final thought here. Tell me a little bit about what you see for comics going forward. Comics, not just the comic book store, but comics going forward. Do you see them continuing this trend that we were talking about originally, or do you see them going back?
For right now, that's all I can see. But I hope, that the powers that be, the people at the top, will start, doing some of their own homework per se, and reaching out to their core audience and the fans and say, what would you like to read more of? What are you tired of? What do you don't want us to do? What do you want us to do? I would hope they would do something as simple as that, just a poll, some kind of, DC or Marvel do something online and say, check these boxes, and see what gets the most votes, and then they can kind of steer the company in that direction. But it wouldn't be surprising to me to find more fans out there like myself that are tired of these huge crossover event stories, and then tired of them all being so dark. Like I said, especially now, with everything that we're going through in modern times, with the pandemic, politics, terrorism, economy aspect, everything we're suffering, we see the real world around us every day and how dark and depressing it is. More than ever, right now, we need hope. More than ever, we need inspiration. And that's what comic books offered. They offered us that escapism. They offered us, that fiction gave us a way to dream, to see that there were better things. And then hopefully if fans, can get that again, then maybe future generations can fix things in the world.
Right.
It hopefully will inspire them as they get older.
Okay. All right. Well said. Okay. As always, thank you for watching this episode of Retro Serial. If you like what we're doing here, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It's a small step for you, but it really means a lot for us, and I'd be really honored if you subscribe to our channel. If you want to go an extra step, you can share it on your favorite social media, hit the like button, hit the bell notification. Follow the link below to the Buy Me a Coffee page where you can donate some of that hard-earned cash to what we're doing here. And also, if you are listening to this on podcast form, please give me a rating, give me a review. It would mean a lot to us. Share it as well with your friends who also listen to podcasts. Let them know about all the cool things that are happening right here. And if you're only listening to this on audio, please, I would really encourage you to go over and go to the YouTube page as well, because there are some things that are exclusive to YouTube. If you like what we're doing here, everything that we do here is also on the YouTube page, plus some stuff that doesn't quite that doesn't quite transfer over to audio only. I do top fives over there and things like that. There are just some things over there on YouTube that's just more for the visual than it is for the audio only. But if you are just listening to this on audio, I just want to thank you so much. I don't care what platform you're listening to this on. I'm glad that you're here. So thank you once again, and we will talk to you again on another episode of Retro Serial.